Hey, everybody, you're listening to and possibly watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
And we are your hairy, heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in.
Yes.
Proud to say that. And we are at a bit of a disadvantage this week because two of us rely on a particular mail order service to receive new comic books, and they're a little late. Not too late. I'm getting mine tomorrow. I don't know, Steve, if you got your notice, but
tomorrow probably.
Yeah. So a little bit late. So we were in a bit of a dilemma about what we should talk about. And, you know, we can always talk about older books, but we haven't had an episode dedicated to manga in a while. I think we did have one, correct, Steve?
Mm-hmm.
Like way back when?
we had one several years ago. I'll probably look up the number, see if we can.
It's at least 5 years ago, if not more.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, maybe it's time to break out the manga talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know Caleb's actually been presenting a bunch of, some of the great books that he's been reading.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So it kind of inspired me to also look up some stuff that I've been meaning to read that people keep recommending that I haven't read yet. I've read some Junji Ito, but I hadn't read this one. And I had watched some of the anime of the book I'll be talking about, but I hadn't actually read the book that it was based on. And so I got to, use this as the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm relatively new to manga. I actually didn't start reading manga until the last few years, and it was when I was doing Southern Fried Geekery, where our co-host Sean super into manga, and so he got me reading some stuff and let me read my first, or convinced me to read the first one. Just not something I ever paid attention to. And for me, I didn't grow up with the availability of anime. So I didn't have cable or satellite growing up. We just had standard analog, go outside and turn the antenna in a storm so you can listen to the news guy tell you where the tornado is going to kill you at. That's all we had. So PBS and ABC and NBC and stuff. So I didn't have that anime that it's a gateway for that. So so for me, it's relatively new. And I should say, since Bill, actually, I think three of us are in the same boat, because I get my books mainly from DCBS too now.
That's right. I'm very sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I've whittled down my physical copies, and I just decided to close my pull box at the local shop. And so I read a lot more digitally now, just because there's those apps that you can, and for a subscription fee, a relatively cheap subscription fee, considering what all we read, I get all of it. I can just go mow through it. Maybe have to wait a little bit, but I tend to do that anyway, because I like to read in chunks. But man, as far as bang for your buck and bargain, the Viz app, it's like $2.99 a month. And I'm going through, and again, I say I'm relatively new to this, but I'm going through, I've read all of Dragon Ball, and I'm a quarter of the way through Dragon Ball Z now. They've got all the classics on there, and stuff. So I'm going to be able to go back and check all of that. The only thing that they don't have on there that I really, really want to read is Akira. So that's the one downside, is they don't have that on that app. But I think I'm going to just get the box set at some point. I'm just going to spend the money. I haven't read it, but I want it. I know it's something that I just feel like I wouldn't mind seeing on the shelf.
Well, I really want to throw something at Steve, because Steve was just at the right age for a lot of this stuff happening. You just look at that smile. He's a Suncoast kid. But for me, there wasn't any around when I was a kid. We didn't even have repeats in the Philadelphia market. They would show repeats, at least for anime, of Marine Boy and of Speed Racer. And so there were times of it's a rainy day and we're on vacation at the shore. It's I get to watch Speed Racer.
Yeah.
Boy for once. So we had nothing until Battle of the Planets and then Star Blazers, but it wasn't until the 80s that you saw actual manga being republished by American publishers. So I was there for some of that, but at the same token, people forget how goddamn expensive Akira and Lone Wolf and Cub were. That was buying the Dark Knight month after month. So some of the economics were a little bit problematic, but there were some publishers, particularly Eclipse, that
Yeah.
I eventually.
Yeah, because Eclipse had like it had all the Captain Harlock stuff. I want to say.
No,
was that?
no.
Who
Harlock
was that?
with
Was that Dynamo?
Harlock was unlicensed with the precursor of Malibu. And they actually didn't really have the license, but they released them at the same time. Legend of Kamui, My the Psychic Girl, and Area 88 at the same time. And I think for most of the runs they were twice a month too, and standard. Like I don't know when we started getting actual like manga-esque manga volumes. That would have been sometime in the 90s, as far as I know. But Steve, I really want to throw this over to you because you were of like the right age for this stuff to hit. Yeah.
Right. And really, like, I dipped my toe in, of course, based on anime. Like, when I was a kid in the 80s, what we had a lot of translated and highly edited cartoons that were coming over that were like Voltron, Transformers, Transformers and Voltron that we didn't really think of as Japanese origin shows. I mean, when you're that age, when you're a kid, you just see giant robots, punching other giant robots and/or monsters. It's cool. It doesn't matter where where that cartoon came from, and of course, it's being dubbed and re-edited and the stories and plots are being jumbled up around and made very palatable to Western audiences.
And for a little kid like you, shows that were based on multiple shows like Voltron and Robotech. You just didn't pick up on that.
You did pick up on that. And of course, like those were the ones that I was allowed to watch. Like anything that had magic in it, and Voltron kind of like skirted that line. Like it was forbidden in my house. So we, anything that was robots, fighting other robots or, stuff like that was pretty cool. Robotech, I got to see a little bit of that, but not too much. Because I think the market where I was watching a lot of the stuff, it wasn't really airing, unfortunately.
For me, Robotech was on at like 6:30 in the morning, and telecolleges couldn't get up at 6:30.
I would have watched that because I got up super early so I could watch TV. I was a true indoor kid from like the age of 4, but that was just it was one of those things where you just kind of grew up watching those kind of shows, but they kind of merged in with the bigger commercialized Mattel toy based shows. Like everything had a toy tie-in, so it all just kind of blended together. But in high school, so like once I moved from Rhode Island to Connecticut, there was a brief period where Sci-Fi Channel was starting to show Saturday anime. And that was where you got to see a lot of mostly films, like full-length ones, like Project A-ko and things like that would be on Saturday. And it was so cool to watch. And that's when I kind of started getting into actually trying to find a lot of Japanese films and to find the original anime in Japanese. And of course, this was also around the time that Sailor Moon got translated and put out by Geek. And of course, me and my friends were just totally into the show. We would come in and just like, oh my God, did you see blah, 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 blah? Like, quoting Sailor Moon crap. But, when I was able to start with money, and because I had quit my comic book habit and had all this extra cash I needed to spend on something, Suncoast Video, that mall staple, was there with $30 VHS that would either have one film or maybe 2 episodes of a series. So that's where I picked up my my copy of Akira for $30 for a VHS tape of Akira. And that's $30 in like 1990.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Money, 1996 money, which is crazy to think of right now. But, that's what I do. I would like save up all my money for a couple of weeks and then like go spend it all in one go buying like the latest available box, hard clamshell translated version of Tenchu Muyo, the next couple episodes of that, or Inuyasha, or basically anything that Manga Video was putting out, like Ninja Scroll. Like, oh my God, Ninja Scroll. Like, if you could find, for me, I was like, I want to find the the non-translated. I want to find the, the subs. I didn't like the dubs. It was like subs all the way, but subs were always more expensive for some stupid reason. I don't really understand.
It was like an extra large.
Yeah, it was like,
it was like
why is it more expensive? Because they had to type something? Like, what? Like, what's up? But yeah, like, I plastered my walls and my locker and my binders and all that stuff with anime stuff. I had a subscription to Animage magazine. That was really fun. And I was taking Japanese in high school. So it was like, yes, I got the whole package. Yeah. But I hadn't gone into manga yet until my first, basically school trip to NYC. And one of the things that we did, we'd go around to like different things, different museums or whatever, and see stuff. But we'd always hit up Rockefeller Center. And I want to say it was around Rockefeller that the Japanese bookstore at the time, Kinokuniya, that was there. I went in there and just fell in love with the place. And of course, what do they have? Shit tons of manga, like just straight from Japan. Nothing's translated, just right there, ready for you to take. And for a kid just learning Japanese, just sort of like, oh my God, I can't read 90% of this, but yeah, this is so much fun. And I picked up a couple volumes of Sailor Moon. Picked up a couple other volumes of some stuff that had actually been translated, and I thought it was just the coolest thing. But I didn't buy as much because you couldn't really find it anywhere else, and you couldn't find it translated. So it was kind of like it was a cool thing if I got to New York or maybe in Boston, I would find something in a bookstore. But that was the 90s, and then of course 2000s rolled around, and all of a sudden Viz became huge. And so you're able to buy it at a comic shop, but then also a lot of other companies were also bringing over the original, the same size volumes of stuff. Like you could get Shonen Jump, just at a Barnes and Noble, which was kind of like, oh, hey, wow.
You could get Shonen Jump for a long time at your supermarket.
Yeah.
There was a window of about 2-3 years where it had widespread newsstand distribution. Widespread.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it
was bang for your buck. It's much like the Viz app,
Yes.
It really was bang for your buck because how many stories would be serialized? About 6 or 7 in each issue?
Oh, yeah.
Something
at
like
least.
that. Yeah.
I mean, those things were there were phone books, and you basically could pick up a phone book once a week, and it was like, okay, well, here's the rest of my story. I mean, obviously, the economics of it and like the work that went into it. If you're a kid just reading it, you don't really care. It's like, so many artists or whatever are essentially killing themselves trying to put out the volume of material that is needed to be published. But it's still really cool. And obviously, there's things are changed now. If you go to any comic shop, I would say most comic shops have, if not like a full wall of stuff, they have a good section of like some manga that people are going to come in and get. Like I said, Barnes & Noble, you can go to a Barnes & Noble and they have an entire section. Yeah, that's just every volume.
Honestly, they have a better, at least at my Barnes & Noble, they have a better manga section than they do comic section. Like it's hard to, so I'll go there every once in a while if I want to find like Archaea books or like a few like graphic novels or things like that. But at least mine doesn't have a very good selection, and at least in the Marvel and DC and Image stuff, it's all kind of just what you would consider like the mainstream front end stuff. So it's really hard to find kind of niche books or even like books like Fantagraphics and stuff. Every once in a while, like they have my favorite thing is monsters and stuff like that. But they when I go scan their manga section, there's more stuff. At least from my own like ignorance bubble. It was like, hey, that looks awesome, and I've never heard of that. That looks really cool. Like, what is that thing? And I think that's really cool though too, because it's right down the street, and I can just go kind of browse and look around and see what's there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the dynamic was in other areas of the country, but where I was, Borders had an amazing manga selection, and I think there was a point where it was something like 30% of their sales.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean,
at all.
when it hit big, when you had the amount of translated material available, and even in the same format that it was originally published, that, it took off. Like basically, it's that if you build it, they will come. Like if you provide the product, kids will just,
Yeah.
gravitate towards it. James actually has joined us, James Figueredo.
Hey,
Hello,
James.
Hey, buddy.
And he mentioned too, in the late 80s, early 90s, Dark Horse published a ton of manga in the US. And yeah, they did. Yeah. And they also did sort of like the US kind of, I would say, isn't Usagi Yojimbo also originally Dark Horse, or did that come from?
No, I think, wasn't he originally with Mirage?
Don't give me the line. I'm not a Usagi person, so
yes.
Yeah, and that's also like a kind of like
manga,
weird area of like the stuff that manga influenced.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fake mecha in the late 80s. A lot of, there's a huge influence on Frank Miller.
Yeah,
huge influence on.
Well, and you just mentioned that Lone Wolf and Cub. I mean, Dark Horse published all of that, and like the ones that Dark Horse published, Frank did most of the covers for.
Yeah, and they eventually went into other properties like Outlanders, that they moved on.
But I think anime really, like the fact that anime was becoming popular, like it wasn't just sort of like an underground thing that college kids would talk about how cool Appleseed was or whatever. Like you could actually buy it at Suncoast, buy it at Media Play, and then they became more affordable so that more people could buy it. And then DVDs hit, and you could get an entire series on one disc, as opposed to 15 VHS tapes that when I was doing all of Mobile Suit Gundam, I was checking out like 3 VHS tapes at a time from the local video store in Montreal, and just sort of like lugging them home. And then the next day after class, I would go back and like get the next 3 tapes, like lug them home and watch them at night.
I know you cited the example of you spending $30 on Akira. The prices eventually came down when OVAs became much bigger. And I think that also coincided when we actually got formatted manga in the States with the back to front reading. And, still to this day, most of those are around a $10 price point.
Yeah.
Some are a little bit more, but, it's still, I think that was also a huge amount of its appeal was the practicality of it. You could put it in your back pocket, depending on how big your pocket was.
Or at least your book
that
bag.
with a graphic novel.
You could throw a whole bunch in your book bag and still have room for your actual school books. That I think that's kids these days and all that. But I think they did have the benefit that in the 80s and the 90s, if you came across manga, it's like lucky you. Even luckier if it was translated. At the comic book shops where you could actually get when Viz was putting out editions or Dark Horse or Eclipse or whatever, and it was translated, it was still in an American format. So still, read left to right, black and white, I guess. But, again, most of what you can find in comic shops, if it was in the indie section, then that's where it'd be. So it wasn't super available. But like now, starting in 2000, you can go to a Hot Topic. It used to be like you can go to Hot Topic and find some manga, but now again, any bookstore. My local, my favorite bookstore here in town, Bookmarks. It's an independent, nonprofit. They have a good size manga section, and they have 2. They have one for kids, and then one that's for like general adults.
And there's also, I think, an alignment with music. Like in the 90s when used CDs became a thing, there was also a lot of recycling of manga. Like people would not necessarily hang on to it,
right?
Trade it in for other things, and I think that also added to its popularity.
Yeah,
there was this, a kind of sharing in a sense.
Yeah. It kind of made you in Japan, of course, they have these. They're like manga libraries where you could just go and get a whole bunch of it's just wall to wall manga, and you can go and check it out, and it's usually really cheap to do. Obviously, we don't have that in the U.S., and getting manga in most libraries now is still kind of tricky for some people. Although some libraries do have a good collection.
Yeah.
But the sharing is it's kind of in that same wheelhouse. It's like there's so much to read.
Yeah. And in terms of the translation to digital, it was much more appealing and much more functional than traditional 4-color comics. Without a doubt. Yeah.
Cheaper. I think is a functional word there too.
No, but even the the movement and like I don't have to go back to front now. I can just swipe. There's something kind of appealing about that too. If you've been used to,
which is nice.
Yeah.
Until you like get confused and you accidentally go the wrong way and you're like, wait, no, I already read. Oh no, the other way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There was a manga of it's a little hard to tell sometimes. You really have to do your research with some of these older properties, if it was the manga preceding it or it was or it was a kaiju show and then they put a manga out. The manga of Kikaida, when I was reading that, the second volume, I must have read the same 14 pages like 10 times because I just forgot where I left off.
Yeah.
And also another thing is like a lot of these were much more adult than I think some kids were prepared for. Like even some like traditionally kiddish properties like Astro Boy. The Astro Boy manga, which I read all 21 volumes, has not held up well. It hasn't. But there are some adult themes in there they'll blow your mind. Because again, with the audiences, this was, it wasn't necessarily just children or teenagers, and it was a much broader sense of appeal to who was actually reading these.
Do you think? And I think that might be something kind of like I would say cartoons in the U.S. I mean, you look at Looney Tunes and things like that way back, but also some of the I would say less commercial, like the commercialized cartoons of the 80s are, it's one thing most of the time. But like, the Hanna-Barbera cartoons from the 60s and 70s, they had that appeal where you could watch it when you're a kid and like not get some of the jokes, but still have a great time. Yeah. And then like when you're older, you can look back and go, oh man, there's so much more there. And
it's the Shrek effect, right? Like Shrek did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't really get back into that.
Best examples of that is Bullwinkle.
Yeah.
Bullwinkle, you can watch it on, it can be watched by children and they'll just enjoy the novelty. But there are some jokes where you actually need like a master's thesis in literature to fully appreciate.
You need to understand geopolitical reality of like 1964.
There's some stuff. I mean, they were just like, whoa, way over those kids' heads.
Did he just say something about Kissinger? Like, what's going on? No, but it's I think in the U.S. we got back to that with Cartoon Network. I think a lot of and some of the Nickelodeon shows really kind of went back to that line where they're making children's cartoons, but there's stuff in there obviously for older audiences. From people who grew up watching those older cartoons that actually had really cool sort of like split jokes and things like that.
But it does seem like when you do have like a manga and an anime, the anime will be much more adult, no matter what property it is. Maybe because they had the bandwidth to play around with adult themes more.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and there's something interesting about the audience of these things too, because I mean, so at least where I grew up in rural Arkansas, right? Not exactly the paragon of culture. The kids who were reading manga and anime, like, and one thing looking back, it took me a long time to realize this, is that they were the ones who were more open to other cultures, like open to something else that's not made here, right? Like, and and I think that's part of what draws a certain type of person to that, and especially at least growing up for me, again, kids who like things like Gundam, Dragon Ball Z, and those kind of things. Looking back, they were all kind of the nerdy kids, but I look at them and I was a different kind of nerd, but you look back now and it's just like, okay, well, they were seeking out stuff that was explicitly non-American at a time that we were all like looped into American comics and American consumerism and getting sold things. They're not getting sold anything because nothing's being sold in that is being sold to them. They were just doing it explicitly for these kind of like non-jingoistic stories, and I think that's really cool looking back on it now, because there is certainly like tonally, what you see in those anime and that manga from that era, as they kind of influxed over, totally different from all of the like hyper masculine and nuclear family-esque type thing that we get here. So I think that's neat looking back on now.
Yep.
To see how it permeated the culture, and it permeated a particular type of culture to create like this niche group of people.
And it did attract a lot of nerds, because it is, at the time, it was kind of a collector mindset. You had to look for this. You had to seek it out. You had to, go to a Usenet group and find like the address of the guy in Jersey who can get you dubs of, or get you like copies of VHS, copies of something that aired in like the Philippines that is, has English subtitles, even though it's the original. Like you could do, and like it was cool. And same thing with getting getting manga. Like I could only get it if I went from my little Connecticut suburb into the big old city, and I could find it at stores where the dominant language was not English. And it was just kind of cool. It was the thrill of the hunt. You would find really cool stuff. You would get whatever you could. Now you actually have the choice. You can see all the stuff. You can see, the good and the bad. Because of course, you put out in any industry, in any comic publisher, it's going to have a load of like shovel. That's like, this is kind of like those 15 other things that are really great. But yeah, but it allows us to see all the genres that are available. You can get your boy love books. You could get your hyper violent body horror. You can get your like very simplistic like home life, whatever. You can get your retellings of Heidi. Like you can get all sorts of things.
I mean, there's a 50-year legacy of some really good sports manga. Really good, and that almost in some ways that appeals to people who aren't even into sports. I think because there's also very heavy soap opera element to them. Yeah.
But I mean, back to the point we were making earlier, though, when you think about what was coming out from comics that time, like the Comics Code Authority kind of throttled everything else that wasn't superhero comics, or with very few other things. I mean, at one point in time, the U.S. had romance. I mean, Jack Kirby invented romance comics, right? Like you had all of these different, the Western genre was on and popping, and so you had all of these different things. And the Comics Code Authority came in there and strangled that for at least, American publishing. So, at least when you hit the late 80s and then my era in the 90s and stuff like that, like there's manga being produced and sold that are just stories that are like outlandish. We've never been able to see before, at least in like 30 years to some degree. Unless you're going into underground comics and stuff like that. I mean, of course those existed, but I think it's part of that draw. It gets across people that, hey, here's, the Comics Code Authority created the quote unquote comic nerd, right? Like because it was superheroes, it was like hyper masculine stuff, at least in the way I think of things. Because it eliminated the fact where, mom and dad would read comics, where sisters would read comics. There were comics for girls and all these kids. To me, the Comics Code Authority kind of killed that in a big way and funneled it down to something not, that wasn't available to everybody. And it limited a lot of what the American readership had at least offerings of.
I don't subscribe to that.
Okay.
Just if you look at the publications of DC Comics through the 60s, you had humor, you had war, you had romance. Yeah, I don't really subscribe to that. I know where you're coming from.
Sure.
I understand that, but I don't really think it was the code that really did that.
So when did the code
to think about Marvel, because Marvel was very restrictive to superheroes.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, and which is funny because
they had Millie the Model, and they had a couple of westerns at the peak of the Marvel age. Were going, but it was primarily superheroes based. That's something I have to think about, but I don't really subscribe to that yet. I understand where you're going with that. Okay.
Yeah. Or like what actually trickled down to the popular opinion and culture absolutely was more geared towards superheroes even though you had like all the movie tie-ins, you had the kid friendly kid tie-ins and stuff like that in the 80s, like the Care Bear comics and whatever. But yeah, I think the stigma was there. The stigma stayed there for a lot longer than it probably should have because of the code existing.
Especially considering what was being published by the mid 80s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But like for Japan, they didn't really have that restriction as much. I mean, manga has a very long history, and was used a lot to encourage literacy, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, to educate the population. And so it was not stigmatized as this is a thing for children. It was treated as this is a type of literature that can be consumed by anybody. And so you can go to Japan now, you could go to Japan 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and see grown men reading comics on their way to work. You can see, women talking about comics because there was like romance comics that were geared towards, some women who like that. And, kids could read stuff. Older kids could read stuff, college kids could read stuff, and there was something for everybody. And of course, it was all it was commercialized in a very different way, but it was commercialized there. But there was just it didn't have the stigma attached to it. Whereas here, comics are for kids or were for kids for a very long time, even when they weren't for kids.
Yeah,
and that's naturally going to have effect on the progression. Yeah. As an art form.
Something I wonder about, I would like to ask an academic about this, and we know a few, maybe we can reach out to them and stuff like that. I wonder if there's been any studies on at least the reception of comics as a visual medium, if they've looked at the way that literal written language has worked in that. Because when you think about manga and a lot of your Eastern Asian writings, kanji and that kind of thing, it is more visual, right? It's more visual than our letters, because a lot of it is, it literally over time is representative of, this is what this kind of looks at, and it's been molded that way. So I wonder if there's any connection to just the way that written language has evolved in those two cultures.
Even the stylization of fonts is far more varied.
Yeah,
than we ever would have had.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wonder if there's any of that that goes into the way that comics were, and for me, I should say, when we're having these conversations, I realize that there is functionally a difference, on maybe superficially a difference, I'll say, in comics and manga, right? To me, it's all words and pictures juxtaposed together to tell a story. So I tend to consider it the same medium, just a different variety of that medium. But I just wonder if that plays into the way that our different cultures have embraced and are commodified or infantilized that kind of visual medium.
Well, I mean, you look in Europe, and comics in Europe had you had comics for kids, but you also had more adult oriented, especially France. You had more adult and oriented comics.
But
the French were also really instrumental in bringing manga to the West and bringing anime to the West. There was a much longer history of being able to get manga in France and French speaking territories because they liked it.
Italy as well.
Italy, France. I mean, those two, they were able to bring Japanese comics because it was more in line with some of the more adult bande dessinée that they had in France and and I guess in Italy as well, and I'm sure Spain too. I think Spain probably would have been a good market for that.
Yeah, I mean, Italy to this day, in terms of a collector's market, if you're looking for toys based on manga, odds are there was an Italian version.
Yeah, and so
from the 70s on. Yeah,
the US.
So we've got Italy, we've got Japan, we've got parts of France, and we've got parts of Spain. Are we sure that good manga just doesn't run hand in hand with countries that were taken over by fascists at some point? Because if so, America manga is going to be fucking fire in about 15, 20 years.
Oh, I'd rather there be no such thing.
Facts.
Yeah, I'd rather there
be no such thing.
But yeah, I mean,
that seems to be a conversation for another time.
Yeah,
but
I think
we're more than that.
Just in terms of literary,
talking about our books that we would, promote to people watching this or listening to this. books that we enjoyed that they make. So
yeah,
well, we get going with that. So I'm going to go with Steve M from manga. We're going to go with Steve. You're going to go first. So tell us about a manga that you really enjoyed and why.
Well, I'm gonna start with a manga that I came to through an anime that was recommended to me, and alongside the anime, people also recommended the manga. In fact, I think randomly, I was in the Bahamas? I think I was in the Bahamas, and somebody messaged me on Growler, because I have comic, like I talk about comics in my profile, and they were like, "Oh, you like comics? Do you like manga? Like, have you read Frieren?" And I was like, "No, what is that?" And they were like, "You have to read this. This is so good. There's an anime. The anime is pretty good too. Blah 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 blah. But you have to read it." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And I put it off for a while. And I did eventually watch most of the anime, and like the first season that aired last year. Excellent, beautiful story, very well told, very emotional, a lot more emotional than I thought. But it took me a while to actually come into the manga series. And so, for this week, I decided, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm actually going to, read the first volume. And oh my God, it's, I thought the anime was pretty emotional. The book is emotional. Pretty much every chapter had me on the verge of tears. And I love that. So this is, this book, Frieren Beyond Journey's End, is a perfect title for this. Frieren is the main character. She is a nigh immortal elf mage, and is at the beginning of the book. You find her. You're introduced to her as part of a party, a traditional dungeon crawling, RPG party where she's the mage. Himmel is the main character, is the hero. You've got Eisen, who's a warrior dwarf, and then you have Heiter, who is the priest, who's also like a raving drunk, is probably gay, just really sacrilegious for being a priest. And we're introduced to them at the beginning after they've completed their 10-year journey. They've been, slaying dragons, slaying ancient evils, saving towns and villages, and they finally make it back home to the original kingdom, like the original castle town that they started out from 10 years ago, as just young, sort of unexperienced adventurers, or mostly, because Frieren, again, is hundreds of years old, but she looks like a young woman, and her attitude towards her travel companions is that, well, they're humans. They don't live very long. I can't really get too attached. I don't really understand how they really exist or like move through time the way that they do. Like for me, I'm barely even, out of childhood, and I've been alive for hundreds, if not 1,000 years already. And I'll be living for 1,000 or 2,000 years more. So she's just, she's treated as a hero with the other three, and they're celebrating, they're being celebrated, and she's just kind of realizing that, like, do I really know these people that I've spent the past 10 years with? Like, I don't, I've just been here for 10 years of their lives and 10 years of my life. It means almost nothing to me because of how I live. The greater arc of my life is going to go on forever. And she doesn't really think about it. She's just sort of like, okay, well, this journey's done. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go find some more magic spells because I really like studying. So I'll be back here in about 50 years. How's that? For the next meteor shower or whatever that we're going to go see. And so she leaves, and she comes back to the town, and Himmel is now this tiny little, because, in Japanese literature, if you're a big strapping dude, you could be 6 feet tall, 300 pounds. When you're old, you're going to be a 2-foot midget. And, you'll have a really big beard. And so she comes back, and now Himmel is like this tiny little old man. And he's like, oh, well, it's so great to see you. You haven't changed a bit. And she's like, well, you have, but that's because you're a human and you're going to die. And he's like, yeah, that's probably true. So they get the gang back together. They're all old men now. And they go and journey to go see this meteor shower at this beautiful spot. And right after, Himmel dies. And she's there at the funeral. She sees all these people weeping for their hero. And it hits her that she screwed up, that she didn't take the time to understand what she had with the friendship with this man, or with the three, other men that she spent 10 years of her life in. But that was a big important part of their lives. And because she just stayed aloof and she didn't understand humans, and she used it as an excuse to wall herself off. And at that point, she breaks down in tears. She's like, I fucked up by not getting to really emotionally understand my place in their lives and their lives place in mine. And so she leaves, and she just kind of like still doing her same thing, but something's missing in her life. And she goes to Hyder, who's now even older, and he's rescued a young girl. And the young girl happens to be a mage as well, and he asks her to kind of stick around and help train her, basically to take her, because he does not long for this world. So she does take Fern under her wing, and over the next several chapters of the first volume, you see how Fern is aging. So time is passing while she's journeying around with Frieren, just kind of hanging out, doing the things that Frieren wants to do. And each time they stop in each chapter, something is done, something is accomplished, and they realize that they're following her old footsteps with her party. So she's following in the same journey that, at this point, 80 years ago, she and her friends went and followed. And lots of things have changed. People have grown old. Little kids that she encountered when she was there originally are now these old men. But she's retracing these steps. She's showing Fern, kind of like what her history is. But at the same time, Fern is realizing that Frieren is changing a little bit at a time and becoming a little bit more understanding what it is to be human and what it is to stop and smell the roses, sometimes very literally, and understand, like, you may live in this vast timeline and we don't, but that doesn't mean that you can't experience life as someone who lives it very briefly. And it's extremely emotional because you see she's almost like a neurodivergent person. She doesn't really understand social cues. She doesn't really understand why people think the way that they do. But as she continues this journey, and as Kanehito Yamada describes what she encounters and how people interact with her, you see those cracks begin to form, and that that little bit of light shining through and understanding. And that's why pretty much every chapter in this book, there's a moment that brings a little tear to my eye just reading, because she realizes something, or she recognizes something, or somebody tells her something that she didn't really realize was important at all, that she did 80 years ago, but actually made a vast difference, not just to the life of one person, but the life of hundreds or thousands. Being a hero, what that really meant. And it's such a great book to start out with. And the series itself comes massively highly recommended. It is complete. I'm not sure how many volumes altogether. It's like 10 at least, I think. But it's a gorgeous series. The art by Tsukasa Abe is, it's very fantasy, fantasy influenced. You might look at it and say, like, okay, well, this is kind of like standard manga type look. But they capture, so much detail in sort of like the architecture that they encounter. Some of the creatures and enemies that they run into are just beautifully rendered. And, it's just really great. So just kind of looking at the detail work that they put into just the, this is a scene like in the early part of the book where they're just kind of palling around. They're having a good time, the four of them. And you could say, like, Frieren's just like, I don't know what this is. Like, you guys are putting flowers on you? Like, what's the big deal? But there are moments where, and this one too, why why aren't you sad? Like, because I didn't know this person well enough. We just traveled together for only 10 years. That's all. Like, why is this so powerful? Like, what does this really mean? And she just encounters different things, and she's like reliving a lot of these memories through the first volume. But I highly recommend this series, and the anime is really good too. Like, if you have read the book or don't have time to read the book or whatever, or have difficulty finding it, again, Viz app exists and it's great. But these are also available, Kindle. They're available at most stores that carry manga. I mean, it's definitely worth the pick. To pick it up. And this is a poster for the anime here. But I can't recommend it enough, and I'm so happy that like some rando messaged me on Growler from Florida when I was in the Bahamas 2 years ago to tell me that I need to read this. So thank you.
You know what year that started?
It's relatively recent. I think this original, I think it was originally published, let me see, volume 1, 2020. So it's relatively recent, was the first volume. The manga, or the anime series started in, I want to say late 2023, so in 2023 to early 2024 for the first season. I don't know if they'll continue with the second season. They pretty much covered most of
I love the little dwarf. It looks like somebody said, well, what if Cousin It was like a battle Viking?
Oh, yeah.
It's just like this little teeny tiny just fur with an axe. I love it.
The great thing about the dwarf that's Eisen, so there are moments when they flash back or when they're young, and his arm sort of appears out of his cloak and his beard. Like, you don't really see it much. And it's like this massive, like huge biceps, like big forearms. So
yes, like, what if Cousin It was a battle dwarf?
He was a battle dwarf. And then, of course, when they fast forward, they run into him again, like 80 years down the road. Mm-hmm. And there's one point where she talks about like, well, why is everybody so frail and old? And he like puts his arm out from behind his beard, and it's like a thin arm. It's an older man's arm. And he's like, well, we're not all, yes, we live longer than humans, but like we also age. Like us dwarves, we age too. So we're not like we used to be. And she's unchanged. But
so that's a cool concept too. If I remember, Bill, was it Simonson did a lot of that kind of same thing in the Thor run, where they touched on, the fact that, Thor's a god and he's going to be alive for eons, and for a while, like, the human lives are really, it's a lesson to learn to love the humans because they are so,
fragile.
Steve Rogers a blip in his life, but
fragile and short-lived. But yeah, no, it's great. I recommend it for you guys.
Thank you. Okay, Caleb, how about you? What's a book you want to recommend?
So I read a book actually this week, and I kind of fell in love with it. And it was because I decided to, hey, you were saying, I've really, as far as manga goes, I've only been binge reading Dragon Ball Z. But you were like, let's do a manga. And so I was like, let me go read a couple of number ones. And I read one that honestly is probably going to be my short list of my favorite things I've read this year. It's really good. And that book is Wild Strawberries. And you can read it on the Viz app. And so this book, by the way, I guess for me, there's going to be a theme tonight. Both of the books that I read are kind of, they're all horror, but they're also kind of contagion stories. So if you're still not in a place where you want to read a contagion story, that's fine. You may avoid these. But before I get into what this story is, I'll just say, if you want some type of comparator, it reminds me a lot of The Last of Us. And so that's because this book takes place mostly in inner city Tokyo, but it takes place in this like inner city urban section of the city. And in this world, in this version, there is this contagion, and they call these things Jinka, Jinka. And it's a spore-based parasite that manifests in ways that when somebody gets it, generally, at some point during time, it starts sprouting things, and this massive plants explode out of these people, right? In a lot of cases, they show you it just completely obliterates it. So when somebody's Jinka blooms, it'll just rip their body in half. But there's a weird subset of the Jinka that are almost able to take over the human host, and they go in and out, because what this is these are plants who have adapted to need to feed off humans, and so some of them have adapted in a way that they're almost like cohabitating with the people. And so in this story, obviously, you know, society has degraded a lot. It's very much like The Last of Us, although not as desolate, it doesn't seem. But the world is kind of battling this epidemic of these things coming out. And so they are set up in a place to where there are still civilization. There is still a police force. In fact, there's a police force that is specifically intent to go find these things and eradicate them and stuff. And so, but there's this constant ebb and flow of who's winning and losing. And in this world, there are two siblings that we meet. And there is a boy named Kingo, and there is a girl named Keanu. And they live there. They're very poor. They're struggling to get by. And you start to learn their story. The story kind of sets off as Kingo is basically shoplifting in a little, you know, boutique deli or something like that, just to get food to take home. And the guy, you know, catches him, and he's like, you know, what are you doing? And he, you know, a little flower, he holds up his sleeve, and there's a flower sticking out of it. And the guy's like, oh, hell no. Like I'm calling everybody, and you're going to die. And, you know, the kid runs, Kingo takes off, and the guy starts chasing him. And then out of nowhere, out of alley, this giant flower monster, you know, that would make Mario proud, just reaches out of nowhere and just chomps him, right? Like, and just takes him away. And our kid is able to get back and get to his sister. And so it just gives you a taste of how this world is, where there is still some type of instilled government. There is still a society. It's not completely collapsed, but, you know, around any corner, there could be a weird plant monster. And then we learn that, you know, Kingo's sister, Keanu, is actually infected with a Jinga in a way that's not standard. The Keanu's Jinga doesn't take over her body. It doesn't bloom. She'll have little plant tentacles coming out of like weird spots, like her eyeballs and things like that, but it doesn't bloom. It doesn't hurt them. And she and her brother realized this as they were growing up in an orphanage. They were adopted, and you get this really great flashback scene where they're adopted by this couple, and they're finally going to get their chance. And all Kino really wants to do, as you know, he promises her, I'm going to take you to a family restaurant, because they're orphans, right? Like, I'm going to take you to a family restaurant one day. We're going to sit down and have a meal together. And so they get this opportunity where they're going to get adopted by this young couple who seems to really like them. They just want to help them. And you know, kind of their first night there, they hear them whispering downstairs, and Kingo steps out to see what's happening, and they're talking about eating the kids. And lo and behold, these are two of the type of Jinga that have this relationship where they've taken over the body, but they'll let the Jinga bloom in a small way to eat kids. And that's what happens. You know, this Jinga jumps up to, yeah, these are the adoptive parents as they're about to eat these kids. They catch them eavesdropping, if you're watching on here. But once the one Jinga goes to eat Keanu, her, all of a sudden you see something like morph, and you start seeing things pop out of this other Jinga, and its head explodes. And you find out that she's got a Jinga in her too, and it just protected these kids versus being a threat to everybody around them. And so they've got to figure out how to do that. Well, in this world, if you're caught with a Jinga, you're eradicated. I mean, they literally have people who walk around with flamethrowers to like burn those people and eradicate every bit of it so it doesn't grow back. So they have to stay hidden. And so as they're hiding this, and there's no way to make money, you know, they're late on rent, and so they start getting reported. Well, somebody finally comes and checks up on them. And, you know, the cops get called. They're being watched as you go through the story. Our boy, the brother, has a part-time job literally being one of these eradicators, right? Like, he goes around and he burns the remnants of these plants because that's the only way he can make money. And so as they're out and about, you know, him and his partner who are doing that, they get a call that, hey, there's been another Jinga sighting, and they've got to go report to it. Well, it's, lo and behold, it's where they've been staying, and it's his sister, and she's just sprawled out in front of this street in this miraculous, like, glorious pose. And of course, this brings the wrong kind of attention. Like, the SWAT team shows up, and all the eradicators get there to eliminate this. And he steps in and is like, hey, that you don't understand. This one's different than all the rest of them. That's my sister. It protects us. It's not a threat. You're just scaring her and you're scaring it. And if you let me talk to him, I'll be able to step it. Well, they brush him aside and just go on this full-blown assault. Well, he's not having it. So he actually like trips up one of these SWAT guys, throws a flamethrower to his head because he knows how to use it. And he's like, you need to back off my sister right now, or this is going to get real dumb real quick. And it does get real dumb real quick because these other cops don't really care. They just like one of them just caps him, just drops him. He's like, yeah, we're not playing that, but boom, like you're impeding. We're murdering you too. But that's when the story takes a weird twist. The sister's Jenga launches a full-blown assault, and by the end of it, I won't kind of spoil it. This is in the very first kind of volume, and I think there's 6 out now. When all of a sudden Kingo kind of comes awake and hears people talking, his sister's gone, but the Jenga that was protecting him now lives in him, and he's being taken back to be studied. And that's the end of the first episode or issue, whatever you want to call it. I like this story. It is just it's a fun kind of world. It's a fun kind of environment. It is a lot like The Last of Us. I don't know when this was originally published, but it is just different enough that it doesn't feel derivative to me. And the visuals are amazing. If you're only listening to this podcast and not watching it, go to Google and check out some of this line work. Some of these, like just the visuals of plants meshed in with human anatomy. It's very cartoonish, but it still has a lot of like hyper focused detail. It's just really, really cool. I'm not sure how I'm assuming it's being rendered digitally, but just the medley of flowers that you get, the vines, the thorns, the way that these creatures explode and break people is really fantastic. And you can tell the artist just has a lot of fun with it. And I really enjoy that. The designs are very cool. You actually get some colored images inside this book as well. So you can they really have fun with it. So yeah, in a lot of ways, it's an apocalypse story. It's not a wasteland story, but it's kind of like what happens during the fall when, maybe we've able to stop it a little bit. It's a story about family. It's a brother and sister connection. It's a story about self-preservation. And I'm hooked in. I'm going to start reading this weekly whenever it drops and comes out or whenever I can. This is great. Visually, just plots right up my alley. It's fun body horror.
It reminds me a little bit, and I think it was this image that really did it, of Parasite.
Yeah,
came out years ago, but where you have these aliens that take over different human bodies, and when the aliens like go to feed, they do all sorts of bizarre things with those bodies to like open up and like consume. And then like this image, especially with the parents' heads like splitting open and a flower coming out, but like you still have the nose and the
big gaping mouth.
Yeah, just sort of being there still. It's just that reminded me so much.
Yeah, I'm getting like somewhat of a vibe of the green and the red.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah,
I can see that. I haven't read that actually.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the concepts of the green from Swamp Thing.
Oh, gotcha.
Thing, yeah.
See, that's your pitch there, the green and the red. Converted.
There we go.
That's cool. That is pretty cool. I did find it started being serialized in Shonen Jump in 2023.
Okay,
so it is relatively new. Yeah.
Okay, mine goes way back. Okay, now one of the sad things that I have to say about translation of manga in the States is it seems to really pick up in the 80s, and there really isn't much from the 60s and 70s out there. There really isn't. There's some and Steve may be remembering this phrase, scanslation, but you don't have much. Osamu Tezuka, of course his stuff is going to be published, but even his stuff like Jungle Emperor Leo's never had a stateside release. One exception to that, though, is Maka Gogo by Tsutsuru Ishida. You might know it better as Speed Racer. And in 2008, Platinum Plus Publishers published this absolutely gorgeous 2-volume set, which collected all 5 original manga volumes of Maka-Gogo. And, just absolutely beautiful packaging here. But this also kind of shows the importance of how different this is from the anime. Steve, you have some images there. If you could just put them up again. Well, there you go. That's my copy. These will run you about $100 right now, 120. So it might be a little pricey. It hasn't been reissued yet, but this was the volume that collected the 5 volumes. And Steve, if you can keep going there. So if you don't know the story of Speed Racer, it's basically a family story. It's a family of that, basically is, embedded in the racing world. The actual last name of the family in there is Mifune, and Speed Racer, his name in the actual manga is Go Mifune, and he is a superstar of racing, and he's even at a very young age of 18 years old. The manga is a little bit different. One thing that kind of distinguishes manga is very often there's an arc. Very often it's a life or a journey. There's a beginning and an end. With Maka-Gogo, you don't really get that. The end of it basically implies that these characters can keep going. But one big difference from the manga to the anime is the role of, we'll know him here in the States as Racer X. He's known as Fukamen Racer, which is the masked racer. And unless you were a moron, you easily pick up that this is Speed Racer's long lost brother. And he's this enigmatic character that pops in and out. As the storyline goes further along in the manga, he basically becomes a co-star. And between these two, they basically are the stars of the racing world. There is somewhat of an adversary in the car acrobatic team that's led by Captain Terror, and there's also another character named Snake Oiler. But for the most part, the adversarial aspect of Speed Racer kind of comes and goes. It's not a huge part of it. And Steve, if you just see these, some of these images, some really, really good images about racing and car design. His famous car is the Mach 5. And you'll see some other characters there. I'll just use the anglicized versions. You see Trixie, his girlfriend, and Spritle, his younger brother, and then Pops Racer. There have been adaptations as time has gone on. There have been like 2 animated revivals. There was the movie by the Wachowskis, which I think is severely underrated. I think it's a wonderful film.
I was actually
beautiful.
Going to ask you what your thoughts on that were.
Oh,
I need to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
I love it. It is fun from the word go. It's, but it's also, I can understand its failure at the box office because it was too much. Visually, it's kind of too much. I think there's an argument for that, but just in terms of conception, I think it's stunning. Again, this is one of those instances, as I was talking earlier in the show, where the adult content is a bit more pronounced in the manga compared to the anime. But in terms of the terrain that this covers is huge. It's about racing. It's about family relationships. It's about crime at times. There's some undercurrents of corruption depending upon where these races take place. The mechanics of it really covers a pretty broad spectrum of topics that they cover over the 5 volumes in the original version and the 2 volumes here. So that's my first pick because there are so few instances of manga pre-74 or so that are available. So, and especially when they are in such a beautifully constructed format as this. So that's my choice there. Speed Racer Maka-Gogo by Tatsuya Yoshida. Tatsuya Yoshida unfortunately doesn't have the gravitas of a Tezuka, basically because he didn't live as long, really. But when you think of some of the other properties that he had a hand in creating or created himself, whether it was what immediately preceded Maka-Gogo, which was something called Space Ace. Probably his biggest contribution is Gatchaman to the zeitgeist, but he also had his some other fairly popular series like Cashin and Tekkamon and Yatterman, and also had a few ventures into just straight out humor like Honeybee Hutch. So interesting creator, and I'm just happy there's something of what you can sample pre-74.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting to think about. Like for older anime, like I can think about a couple shows that would have made it over here, or at least are well known enough that we know about them. I mean, everybody knows Tetsuwan and Astro Boy, and Speed Racer, but there were some other ones. I mean, very hard to come by now, even a lot of classic anime from the 60s and 70s that you can't find. Even in Japan, they have difficulty. Like a lot of the kind of like when Doctor Who tapes from the BBC.
Even a huge show like Astro Boy. Even a huge show like Astro Boy, Masters were destroyed in the mid-70s. Luckily, the series survives, but even a series like 8-Man, there are a lot of missing components.
Missing episodes.
And that does extend to manga as well, because they weren't exactly preserving stuff. And one of the reasons why it took so long for the Batman manga to come out that was originally printed in the 60s is because there were 2 segments no one could find. Yeah. They were published, but it took them a long time to find that stuff. So Japan has become much better about preservation as time has gone on.
I think a lot of places have, just because realizing how much was destroyed or just let to rot. In the US alone, we look at silent films, tons of celluloid from like the early days of Hollywood, even up into the 50s, was left to just kind of just turn into goop,
there's
or
lost
whatever.
There's lost media from the 80s at this point.
Yeah.
And being able to digitize stuff certainly helps. At least, well, to some degree, it helps. With preservation, we think, right? But I mean, as fast as technology is shifting and addressing, I mean, having to completely rechange and recode things in order to save it to the next generation of cloud-based stuff, stuff that used to be able to be saved on its own hard drive. Like, at some point, how do you hook those hard drives up to anything? I mean, technology is moving really fast. And so, I mean, we think it's going to be able to help preserve things, but who knows at this point?
Yeah, but I'm just happy that there's something out there so that people understand that anime did not start with Akira and Lone Wolf.
Yeah.
There is a tradition going back to, I believe, at least the teens of manga as we know it being published. So any instance, and then there's some other stuff, like I said, there's the Tezuka stuff, but even there's a lot of stuff that's never been published here, like Amazing 3 and as I mentioned before, the actual Jungle Emperor Leo, Gogo 13, I think Cyborg 009 had published here, but there needs to be more. There really does need to be more.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of those that you named were, again, they were big in Europe. So like you could find a lot of those original translations into French, for Gogol 13. Like he was very popular. There was a lot of stuff that you could find in the early 80s or in the 70s if you spoke French or I guess Italian or Spanish. You could get some of this a lot more easily.
Yeah.
But
one of my frustrations of the Tokyo Pop when they released Cyborg 009, I bought the first 8 volumes. I didn't buy 9 and 10, and 9 and 10 go for like $50 each now. Yeah, I really would like to get those. So.
Oh, there you go. Tezuka's work was being published in the U.S. via Kickstarter, so I guess there was somebody.
The thing was, James, a lot of that in the U.S. was stuff that was arguably public domain, so it wasn't some of the bigger properties. He's the one creator I know about. That's like the one creator out of Japan that I know his stuff, and it was great that they had that. And James, thank you for reminding that. But those were, some of the. I don't want to say some of the lesser works because there were like the precedent to Phoenix and some other stuff in that mix there. But there needs to be more. There needs to be more, especially now that we have digital. Yeah, just get some. Do the translation.
Some nerd will do it.
Yeah.
We're all those nerds now.
Let that be his his master's final. We can all enjoy it. All right,
you get away with it back.
Yeah, because that's something I can totally see Steve doing too.
Hey, my quick story.
Oh, wow!
My final paper. In my Japanese film and media studies course in my senior year of college was done on the idea and presentation of memory using, Grave of the Fireflies, but this is more anime. So Grave of the Fireflies, Captain Harlock, and I forget the third one. It was an alternate history World War II where Japan was actually the good guys. Those were some very interesting anime series. But I actually that was part of my final thesis was all on that.
Grave of the Fireflies. I was a crying mess at the end of that.
That is it's a tough one. Even Captain Harlock. If you know Captain Harlock, Farewell to Arcadia, that one, if you know that and Galaxy Express 39, you watch all of that, you read all of that, and you finally watch Harlock's, Farewell to Arcadia, it's like it ties it all up. Thousands of hours of viewing in this one film, and you're like, holy shit, how'd they do it?
I watched Galaxy Express not knowing that it was actually like cut from a TV show. And that blew my mind when I found out about that. That absolutely blew my mind when I found out.
There's so much in the TV show too. There's so many episodes.
But it was such a well-edited film. That
the film was beautiful.
Testimony.
So well done.
To that.
So well done.
But the Grave of the Fireflies and then The Place Promised in our early days. Balling.
Yes.
Balling. Okay. All right, Steve.
So my next one, I'm going to harken back to Caleb here and say yay, body horror. Woo. So one of the masters of Japanese body horror in the manga sphere is, of course, Junji Ito. And, I've watched and read Uzumaki, Spiral, and, watched the series that came out on Max last year, which was a little bit middling in quality. The first episode was amazing. The second and third episodes were kind of like, ooh, did they animate this on a budget? But that besides, the story itself was amazing. He's done a lot. He's done a lot of, especially in recent years, he's been doing a lot of online publishing with webcomics, so presenting his work rather than in weekly or monthly magazines by actually putting it online for people to read that way. And one of his series of short stories that he's done is Liminal Zone. And I read the second volume of Collected Liminal Zone. This volume was for stories that were originally published online in 2022. This collection, I believe, put out by, I want to say Viz, in the US was more recent. I think it was originally 2023, I think, when it actually came out here. But this is it's an interesting collection. And I was kind of joking with Caleb a little bit earlier that this reminded me very much, and it didn't hit me until the afterword. Junji Ito wrote this great afterword at the end of the collection that basically said, I am almost out of ideas. I don't really have much more to write about. When I was told that I have all the, that I have to do all these stories and like publish these short stories and comics, I was like, man, I'm going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like some of his stories here that he talks about, and kind of in a joking tone too, because even on his worst day, he's still Junji Ito, and his comics are still fantastic. But he was joking. It's like, yeah, he found a scrap of paper where he wrote like turtles on it, like killer turtles, and that became the subject for one of the stories in this collection. And one where he was he had a nightmare about dust 40 years ago, and that became the concept for the opening story in this collection. But what this is, again, even on his worst day, he's still Junji Ito, and these stories are a combination of body horror and sort of like twisty, almost sci-fi, supernatural, but also the art is absolutely gorgeous. So the first story is just a quick tale called The Demon King of Dust, about a little boy who lives with his dad and his housekeepers in this old hotel that was owned by his great-grandfather, who was a major film star. And yet, throughout the years, all of the housekeepers, the boy's mother, seem to just all kind of up and disappear over time. The father is obsessed with dust. He doesn't want it in the house. He freaks out, and the housekeepers essentially spend their entire time just vacuuming everything all day, all through the night, just vacuuming. And yet the dust seems to keep coming in, and it comes in from the top floor, which is closed off, and the boy is forbidden from ever going into it. So clearly, this is a haunted house. This is something very wild and twisty. And the twist gets even more strange and perverse because, of course, this is Junji Ito, involving one of the housekeepers consuming so much of the dust and explaining that the dust is produced by people. It's all of your skin cells in your hair and everything. And she just starts consuming it so that she can make make a baby from it. Like, it's very strange and bizarre. And it's doesn't end happily for really anyone. My favorite story is actually this one that I've put up, and it's actually called The Shells of Manjunuma. And it's about this town that is right next to this big swamp that's filled with all of these turtles. And the turtles make bizarre sounds all the time, like nyarm, nyarm, nyarm. They talk, onomatopoeia is very important. And they have on their shells sort of like an image of a face. And these evil crows will eventually like swoop down every so often, pick up a turtle, and then eat it and drop the empty shell in front of the house of someone who's fated to die. And that person's face appears on the shell of the turtle. And that person then, of course, has some horrible accident afterwards or gets very sick or something happens to it. And this young boy, who's kind of like, he's kind of a shut-in. He lives with his dad. He doesn't really have much going on. His mother's passed away. He finds one of these turtles and he's like, I'm just going to take you home. And because you kind of like, the face on your shell kind of looks like my mom, I'm just going to give you my mom's name. And so he raises the turtle. The father freaks out. He's like, no, that's one of those cursed turtles that's, that foretells death, and tries to, throw it into the road to kill it. But of course, as he goes to do it, a crow comes by and drops a shell in front of him that's got his face on it. He immediately gets hit by a car or dies of a heart attack or some horrible thing happens to him. And the boy is just sort of like, well, yes, I've got my turtle. Everything's going to be happy for me, until the crows eat the turtle. And then, of course, he's the next one fated to die. There's just all sorts of like crazy things going on in this. But one of the one of the stories concerns is called The Village of Ether, is all about perpetual motion machines. And the story itself is kind of inconsequential. It's not a great story, but the imagery really is fantastic. So like the image on the cover and the image here on that I've pulled up of a cat that's just covered in pulleys. I mean, these are all just sort of like this bizarre and also, you know, horrific imagery that Junji Ito is known for. So like a lot of just the shapes and pulleys and you know, and wires that are kind of keeping these creatures together, and that of course extends to the people that he features in this as well. I mean, it's all about the art, I think, with Junji, and how to make it very recognizable and at the same time just so completely horrific that it's hard to really imagine how something like this works.
You gave me a nightmare here. I can tell you.
Yeah.
You gave
Oh,
me
I'm sorry. Here's another one. Here's an image. Like, I mean, we're just showing all of the nightmare images. This is a dead turtle shell that's foretelling this gentleman's death. And yet, with all of these stories, there is one funny one, and that one is the strange Hizukuri siblings. It's actually the third chapter. He's had 2 other chapters previously. One that was from 27 years ago, I think. And this one is called the Uncle Katanusuke chapter, and it's about this orphan girl who comes in and finds this crazy weird family that he's featured in a few of the stories, and it turns out that karma is going to hit this family even harder because she's there, and the reason she's there is because she's connected to the family in some interesting way. But it's funny and goofy. It has like, you know, some Charles Adams flavor to it, and not just with how one of the children or one of the family members is dressed, but it's kind of goofy and funny, and it gives Junji Ito actually a chance to, you know, not be as serious. Yes, there's some horrifying imagery. There's some very disgusting imagery involving tongues, but it's a little bit light, and it's something to kind of like break up the horror that you've been reading the past like 80 pages. But yeah, I mean, is this one of his best works? Not really. Are these stories some of his best? No. And even he admits it, you know, that these aren't his best ideas, and that maybe his best work is behind him. But honestly, just the way that these stories are detailed, the art is extremely expressive, horrifying. I mean, these horror works, I think, to me, and I've been reading several other things that kind of say the same thing. Horror works in short bursts, where if you have short stories or, you know, tales that can get their message across in so many pages, they really have a little bit more of an impact than if you're looking at like a, you know, 400, 500 pound, 500 page, work. And I think Junji Ito really can hit a message in just a few pages, like 20, 30 pages. He can really get his message across. So I do recommend it. I recommend a lot of his older work over this, but if you've read everything and you haven't read some of his short stories, like, these are fun and they're creepy, and there's some really great, beautiful images you can get out of it.
Nightmares. Thanks.
Nightmare fuel.
No, he is nightmare fuel. Like,
yeah,
the some of the stories in Uzumaki are just should live in your brain. But you know what? Actually, you mentioned his funny stories. One of my favorite things that he's done is his little story about his cats, Yan and Moo, or whatever they're called. I forget what their names are. He takes this, and it's literally about him and his 2 cats. And he takes the mundane life, right? Everything that these cats do. We all think, you watch a cat, you think it's cute. He distills them down to what they are, like this evolutionary thing. Like, no, that cat's stalking. Like, that cat's about to murder a thing. Like, and he turns it into a fucking horror story. Like, life with this cat is just, it's like every time you turn a corner, it's like there's a thing looking at you. It's there and it's going to attack, right? Like, and it's hilarious, but at the same time, he's like, okay, this guy can make it. Like, he is a master of tension and pacing, and he does it really well in that story. It's really fun.
That's good. I agree. Like, some of his stuff is just, he knows how to structure a story. And he knows where to dial up the tension. He knows where to sort of like create a false sense of security. But his art always gives it away in the best way possible, because there's always a shape lurking off in the corner. There's some strange, like, you know, some quirk or something in the look of a character. Like maybe a particular character is always got crazy eyes, you know, and you know that something's going to happen because that character's got crazy eyes. It's just, it's interesting. I think some of the stories from the first volume may be more well known. I think there was one about the crying woman in the first volume, if I can remember. Where it's like this woman just sort of dies from the amount of tears, like she's just constantly crying, and that it kind of like a disease almost, or a curse, is passed on to someone else, and just keeps getting worse and worse. But yeah, I mean, he does a lot with Japanese folk horror and Japanese folk tales, and sort of like kind of manipulates them into more of a modern story. But I mean, it's good horror.
It is great. Yeah, it really is. Even as Lovecrafty stuff, like Romina, like I don't like it as much as a lot of the other stuff, but like when he dabbles in Lovecraft and kind of that kind of thing, it's weird, and he takes it to strange places.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's go over to Caleb for something else. Caleb, tell us about a book that you would recommend.
Okay. Well, so again, starting with new series, right? Like if you were to venture onto the Viz app, you would see in kind of the new series section, there's a new book called Astro Baby that came out. And I saw it. I really liked the cover of the first issue that I saw, and I wanted to pick it up. Now, this is by Shira Moria. And I was going to say who did the translation and stuff like that, but I don't have that information right in front of me. But again, this is another, like I said, I have a theme apparently, and it's another Contagion story, kind of. It's another something out in the world comes into the world and causes it to collapse, and there's weird things. But the story really focuses around, well, two main characters. There is a character named Billy and Ellie, and at least in the first part of the story, that's where the story really hammers on. One day when Billy is a kid, all of a sudden this meteor turns into a meteorite. Like it comes down to the earth, and it lands, and this black goo comes out of it. And this little snot-nosed kid, he's watching it, and he's like, well, that's weird. And then he sees it go up to this man, and it like latches on this man and gets inside this man. And all of a sudden, 2 days later, Billy finds this man eating his wife. He's just hovering over this woman and just chewing on her face. So there is something that came out of this meteor that they don't really know what to do with, but it causes an infection, and when it seeps into the people, it causes a cannibal commotion, so to speak, an outbreak of cannibalism. Now, unlike the first story that I talked about, where the plant creatures, they spread by spores, you breathe in something, you touch them, it infects you, and then you spread it. This is not contagious like that. So scientists over the years kind of look at this, and they realize, okay, there's a real science involved in this. This is based out of a central cell. Each of these things is its own individual thing. They're not reproducing. So there's a limited number of whatever these things are on the world. And they estimate between 1,000 and 10,000, which on an island nation could be problematic, right? But they've managed to also sequester it to the northern part of the state, mainly the country, mainly because of the fact that it does not spread. They were able to isolate these people. Well, Billy, when all hell breaks loose and they're isolating this section of the world, eventually Billy is able to get out, right? And he's younger, and so he's able to leave. But while he's there, right, and he's trying to tell people what he saw, at first they don't believe him. And then, he's a little kid, snot-nosed brat, right? They're like, whatever, you're making up stories. But then this girl shows up, this young woman, and she's about 6 years older than him, and that's Ellie. and Ellie is talking to, she comes in and says, hey, like I was actually studying under this guy, and he hypothesized that, if we have a meteor hit the earth or something like that, the impact mixed with like iron could cause combustion and life, right? It could make life. That was his theory, and it seems to be playing out. So she's going to go in to study it. But like I said, Billy eventually, as a kid, he's moved out of there. This keeps getting worse and worse, right? Like there are more outbreaks and they don't know what to do with it. Anybody who's kind of suspected of it can be killed, but there's no signs, right? Until somebody goes crazy and just starts eating somebody's face. But Billy joins, again, this military force that we, similar to the one we saw earlier, where they go into this area. And he comes back in to his hometown. And he does so for two reasons. Number one, because it is his hometown, he cares and he wants to help fix things. And number two, because ever since he was a boy, since the first time he saw Ellie, he fell smittenly in love with her, and he would do anything, even go back into a quarantine zone as a military agent to get back and get in touch with her. Now, him and Ellie have stayed in contact over the years. They've written each other back and forth. Ellie grew up. Ellie got married. Ellie got pregnant. Ellie's researcher husband turned out to be kind of an asshole and said, yeah, I didn't sign up for this. I'm gone. Deuces. I'm out. Leaving Ellie kind of alone and pregnant in a quarantine zone where she, has a job and she's supposed to be working and trying to find a vaccine and a cure and this, that, and the other. The things aren't great. And she is telling Billy this. And so Billy shows up to kind of come back into this world, help police it, help make a difference, and also he's gonna make Ellie fall in love with him. They're gonna get married. He's gonna raise this child, and so far so good. The plan is going great until he actually gets in there and he finds Ellie and they reconnect and they have this beautiful moment, and they're talking, and she's catching up with him, and he proposes, and she's just like, I mean, I've always thought of you as you're 6 years younger than me. And at the time that he's even doing the proposing, I think he's only like 16 or 17, which makes her like 23 or 24. She's like, I really only have ever thought about you as a little brother. I mean, you're a kid. You were a kid. You still are a kid. I can't do that. Like it's just weird. But of course he's like young puppy love and smitten. But she was like, let's pause on the engagement right now. Like, let's just worry about, like, I just met you again. Like we're going to go in. And then all of a sudden, boom, her water breaks, right? Like that baby is coming. And he's just like, oh my God, he's got to call people and bring in there, again, while all this is happening though, because timing couldn't be better, I guess. A kid looks up and goes, Mommy, what's that in the sky? And there is another meteorite. And this one is just slowly sinking towards Earth while this 16-year-old teenager is helping the woman that he had a crush on have her baby that he wants to raise. And as it sinks slowly towards Earth, all of a sudden it just explodes and obliterates, and things go crashing into the skyscrapers in the building, including into the maternity ward where they're at, and slams a piece of metal right into Ellie's heart. And she's dying as she's trying to deliver this baby. But if you pay attention, they're sneaky. You see this kind of venom-esque black goo, and it goes up towards her. And as she's in the stirrups, it goes up inside her. And then you don't know what's happening next. And as the smoke clears and Billy goes and finds Ellie in here and sees that she's been impaled, he's trying to help her, but all of a sudden her skin has fused. And as she starts to step down onto the floor, you see just her veins in her foot pop out and ripple up. And it's all of these effects that you would associate with being infected by this thing that's going to turn you into a cannibal. And she kind of goes after him, right? She kind of goes after Billy. But by this time, other people have shown up. And other people in this military squad, like, they kick her to the side. And they're like, hey, it's one of them. We've got to contain it. We've got, we got to eliminate it. But then Billy looks down, or he hears a voice, I should say. And he's like, what, where is this voice coming from? He looks down, and it's this newborn baby who's talking to him like a grown-ass human. And all of a sudden, Mom is now dead. Billy's got this baby that may be infected by an alien symbiote or something. that he has pledged his life to. And so at the end of chapter 1, he's now got a new lease on life, if you will, as a very militant single father of a symbiote carrying toddler. Not exactly Cable in the Messiah complex, but still a fun story nonetheless. I really like it. I like the different take on this, where it is, again, something foreign, something that's causing chaos. It is something that is infectious, but in this case, it's limited, so to speak. But it does seem to be a chain reaction. And with the 6 years apart or 12 years apart, whatever they were, with one meteorite coming and then another one, and you have to think, okay, are these things being sent by something? How are they showing up? What else is going to happen? It's a lot of fun. I like this kid. You feel for him. He just wanted the family. He just wanted a happy life. He wanted to raise somebody else's kid. Like, he wanted to just he wanted to be his idea of a family man. Right, it was some sense of normalcy, and because of the chaos of the world, he's not able to have that. And but now he is, in a sense, going to get some semblance of family with this that he has to protect, which puts him at odds with everything that he's ever believed in. So I'm curious to see where it goes. I enjoy the art. Again, it's kind of it's not as detailed as maybe. It doesn't have that gravitas that Junji Ito's art has in it. It does feel a little bit standard, kind of stock for like horror manga, right? Like, they're not doing anything just super out of the blue, but it's still fun. Not necessarily the main characters or the main drawings, but some of the background, the line work reminds me of stuff like that Jeremy Hahn does, like in The Beauty, very thin lines, stuff like that, but with more of a manga flair. So again, I'm curious to see where it goes. The baby talking thing was a twist that I wasn't expecting, so let's see how this plays out.
I mean, if you're going to go with a potential space zombie apocalypse, might as well just have a talking baby.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Ride. Yeah.
That might also eat your face.
Yeah, maybe. It's a risk you have to take.
What do you do for love?
Oh, yeah.
But I do think it's funny as they talk about family dynamics, and they talk about this, kind of breaking the mold and throwing people into situations. I mean, there's a lot of weird things here, right? You've got a 16-year-old in love with a 24-year-old. You've got a pregnant woman trying to make it in the world as a single mom, being in science. You've got there's just a lot in this that creates stress. It creates anxiety, and I think that's a fun tool when you can use that correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, Astro Baby.
Okay. Well, we have one more book to talk about, and that's my last book. And Steve, if you can put up the graphic there.
All right.
And the book that I'm going to be talking about is Inuyashiki, and that actually is Inuyashiki on the cover there. His first name is Hiro, and it's no accident that his name is Hiro as the story goes on. And we start the story, and let me give you some backstory about it and the creator. The creator is Hiroa Oku, and probably his best known work is Gantz, which went on for forever. I mean, I think at least like 20 years, and I think that there have been sequels, and there's even a nice little meta moment because one of the supporting characters in Inuyashiki is a massive Gantz fan. There's some really cute things that go on with that, but not all of Inuyashiki's story is cute. We meet this gentleman who's in his late 50s. He's what's known in Japan as a salaryman, somebody who has been with the same company basically since he graduated college, never really advanced too far. And we meet him on the worst day of his life. He's been diagnosed with stomach cancer. He's been given 3 months to live. He's trying to call his family about this. He can't get them on the line. And his only solace right now is this stray dog that he adopted. And the dog's name is Hanako, and that's basically his closest companion. So he has a lot of things going against him, and at a point he needs to get out of the house. He needs to cry, and he goes to a park. And while he's in the park, a spaceship comes and blows up and kills him. Okay. But that's not the end of his story, because these are compassionate aliens and they feel bad about killing him. So they recreate him. They have the technology, and he's basically a cyborg at this point, but with the consciousness of Hiro. And his life is different now. He's not going to die in 3 months. He has these amazing powers because he's basically this technological marvel. Because the aliens only had hardware, they didn't have their normal organics that they could revive somebody with. And his life is very different now. He has these, all of a sudden he feels great. He knows he has these powers. There was somebody else in the park that night, though. And Steve, if you go to the next slide, we see who that individual is. And that's Ichiro. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I screwed up. The name is Ichiro Inuyashiki. It's Hiro Shishimanga. And this is somebody who shouldn't be named a hero. He's a teenage guy. And he's also killed. He's also reconstructed with amazing BattleTech gear. And he turns out to be a complete psychopath. It starts off where he's discovering his powers the next day after all this this incident happened in the park. And he's causing these car accidents to happen just for fun. You know, he's just getting his jollies. And he gets so enamored of his power that within days, he walks into a random house and goes pew, 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 and the entire family is dead. And Ichiro eventually crosses paths with him again. And that happens again and again in the story, where Hiro is taking things too far, and Ichiro is there to, try to help the matters along the way. It eventually gets to the point, though, that Ichiro is on the run from the police. And there's media coverage about this, and they interview his mother and father. And the internet is really vicious to his mother, really vicious, to the point that she commits suicide. And the point that they're almost blaming her for what happened. And in one of the most sickest but kind of coolest moves in the story, he takes his revenge, because he has these technological powers, on all these internet trolls, and kills them remotely through the devices that they're using, through the computers that they're accessing the internet from. It's a stunning bit. It's horrific, but at the same token, you kind of get it, you know. And these two, through the 10 volumes of the story, cross paths at various points. I've read up to volume 6. There's 10 volumes. I shouldn't have peeked ahead, because now I know what the end result is, and it's a massive, epic story. And there are also these wonderful characters. My favorite character throughout that is Nayuki, who is Hiro's best friend, and Nayuki is a good kid, and he just rejects this. He cannot be friends with somebody who is a killer, and he forms this friendship with Ichiro, and trying to get through to Hiro to just stop his rampages. And there's some wonderful moments. Ichiro is worried, since this incident happened, that he's not human anymore. he knows he's himself, and he knows he can feel things, but he doesn't really have it. You can see this is like something that happened right after, where he kind of scratches the back of his head and his head comes off. So there is these like quasi body horror moments that happen through, but there's a wonderful moment where he saves a homeless man from being beaten up by teenagers, and the gratefulness in this man's face just it totally changes Ichiro, and he cries for the first time since the accident. It's a wonderful sequence. And this was a wonderful moment where he's like, he's been a timid man all his life, and he's just like, you know what, I could punch. I can do some good. And there you see a little bit of Hanako, who is his dog, and it's just every illustration with Hanako in it, you can tell that Hiroya Oku just loves animals. You can just tell. Another wonderful moment, these powers that they don't really understand, because the aliens like fix them and then they just split because they're like, I don't want the heat. And there's a wonderful moment where Ichiro revives a cat that had been run over, and it's a really, really touching moment. So even through these moments of hero's carnage, you have these wonderful moments with Ichiro finding his powers and refinding his humanity, and just thinking that this notion, for good or bad, that tomorrow your life is completely different from anything that happened before. And that's the situation that both of these individuals were in, and how you relate to it, how you react to it, how you function going forward might be very different paths. And this is him. This was the first murder where he just says bang, and he basically generates power that comes out of his fingers and kills this woman he didn't even know. And like I said, there's 10 volumes. I've read 6, and I definitely recommend it. It started in 2017, I want to say. 2014, I'm very sorry. There is an anime version that's 11 episodes, and there's also a live action film, which basically covers about the first third of the story, from what I understand. And I definitely recommend it.
I love a good story where the villain's an evil twink.
So many evil twinks.
That's because twinks are evil.
He goes through a journey. There's a point he has a girlfriend, and she's a very calming influence. And the girlfriend is very much in a caregiver situation with his grandmother. With her grandmother, and he comes to live with them for a time, and he changes for a bit, but then it goes then he gets fucked up again.
Yeah.
But you have these elements of, as I said, quasi body horror, because at any point they can, like, jets can sprout out of either of these gentlemen, or their heads can just open up and you get like a stub, like you saw in that one bit. So there are elements of body horror in there. And Hiroya Oku's is very stylized. His violence, and I don't think that these like blat. I'm almost certain that the Japanese translation of blat is blat. That he just basically has a lot of fun with things like sound effects effectively. And to have that, and have so many, it anchored by somebody's humanity through all this chaos, it's a really well constructed story, and I liked it a lot.
That's cool. I mean, that's just really cool. I know I've heard of this before, because I think it's actually because I've seen the image of this old man with like all the guns coming out of him and all of that. Yeah. And it just looked intriguing, but I had no idea it was based on a manga, because I had actually seen sort of like an image that was animated. So I was like, oh my god, this is like,
and it's
this is great.
It's from basically Viz's biggest competitor, Kondasha. So you won't get it on the Viz, sorry. But it's I really enjoyed it, and there was just something about that story in the solicits from previews long ago that said, I'm going to give this a try. It sounds novel, and it sounds like something very unique, and it definitely is. So.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, what other stories? I mean, comics, yeah, but what other stories are there where the heroic protagonist is an elderly gentleman or an elderly person? Mm-hmm. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. I mean, like, Captain Marvel is a kid that turns into a grown man. You have stories like, Jeff Lemire's Black Hammer, Golden Gale is an old lady, but in a child's body.
Yep. I don't think you have too many stories like that.
Yeah, you don't. That's a very cool. I like that a lot.
All right, cool. Well, we're at the 150 mark, so we still have some Geek Gets, and we still have our Woofs of the Week to get. So let's kind of plow through and try to get this in around 2 hours. So when we wrap up an episode of the Comic Book Bears, we have 2 segments. The first of which is where we show off our Geek Gets, things that we got. That are somewhat genre related over the last 2 weeks or so. So I'll start with Steve. Steve, what are your Geek Gets that you're going to be talking about?
Well, real quick, there's my my Wolverine #1 cover poster that I got from my LCS, a Pennyworths. So I always love that. And also I did go to Wendy's and get even more of the little figures. But unfortunately I got 2 of the exact same set of the Batman, Robin, and Harley Quinn in blue.
I just need Zatanna, John Johns, and Amazo. That's the one.
Oh yeah. Which I do have. I think I have those in red. Okay. So
if you get it,
I need to get some more.
Yeah.
More. Must have more Happy Meals, more kids meals.
More. Okay, over to Caleb. Caleb, what are your Geek Gets?
So I took a little bit of trip, and I'll make this fast, but we had some really bad storms in Arkansas this week. And so last Saturday, Roger and I packed up. This was a weekend and said, hey, let's go spend the day with Roger's my husband's 91-year-old grandma, because the storms were going to be really bad. So we wanted to hang out with her and stuff. Well, in the town that she lives in, there's actually a little local comic shop. So I went and popped in and checked out some back issues. And I found a copy of Marvel Comics Presents I didn't have. So I've got this. It's 136. So almost got a full collection of that. And then I found a new, new to me, I found a Dracula series that I didn't have and have never really heard of. And it's from Eternity Comics. And so I may talk about it at some point. But also, while I was out and about, I found some records and picked up a few. So first and foremost, the thing I'm probably most proud of is I found a first pressing of Tracy Chapman. And I love that album. I'm super excited I found it. And it's first pressing, so I was giddy about it. I also picked up last year's Amel and the Snifters album. Love this band, kind of punk-esque band out of Australia. Love the attitude and the vibe. And then I also got the 30th anniversary Typo Negative album, Bloody Kisses. So little sweet reissue of that, and that's my Geek Gets. Other than one book I'm going to talk about next time we chit chat.
With the situation that was a 90s album, is that a double album?
Yes.
Okay. I think a lot of 90s albums are going to be double albums when they put them on a vinyl.
Yeah. So I think I have everything. I need to double check. I think I have everything that Typo did now. I love, Peter Steele is a god in my brain, so I love that man.
Okay, great. Well, for my Geek Gets, I got some home video. One's an upgrade, and one is a supplement. I'll put it that way. So whenever new Cary Grant films come out on Blu-ray, I get them. So 1958's Houseboat recently came out, one of my favorite films of Grant's. So with Sophia Loren, if you know their history, there's a history. And then I also got Woodstock Diary, 1969. It turns out that it wasn't just Michael Wadley who was filming Woodstock as it happened. It turned out that D.A. Pennebaker and with a colleague of his, Chris Hedges, we're also filming the events as they happen, just not for the Warner Brothers crew. And a lot of this footage has all been seen before, but it's a 3-disc set that captures everything that particular team captured. So a nice companion to the Woodstock film. And then Steve knows I love me dollar stores. I love me dollar stores. I wish they weren't as homogenized as they are right now, but I love going to dollar stores, and sometimes you get some gems, and I got some graphic novels. I got the Marvel Verse series. I got 2 books, Jane Foster the Mighty Thor and Captain Marvel. There's like about 25 that were released in these series. They're not full size, but each of these has about 6 to 7 stories reprinted, and price is right. So
nice.
I'm gonna be on the lookout at your Dollar Trees to see if you have these available. And those are my Geek Gets.
Cool.
All right. So now we're going to wrap up the episode, and our last destination is something we call the Woofs of the Week. And the bear community, if you find a fella attractive, you woof at him. And we do something very similar here, where we woof at something which may be comic book related, but it also may be a film or a TV program, charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start as I always do with Steve. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
Well, it's not a movie or a TV show. Shocker. In fact, it's a book. And not only a book, it's a book about books. And that is Grady Hendrix' Paperbacks from Hell, which is a great and hilarious journey through the horror paperback explosion of the 70s and 80s. And it is just an absolute joy to read through. His descriptions, if you've ever read Grady Hendrix' other books, My Best Friend's Exorcism, a couple other series books like that, they're all tongue-in-cheek. They take like the funniest parts of like 80s horror tropes and just twist them into craziness. And a lot of his inspiration came from all these crazy paperback books that were being just flooded the market in the 70s and the 80s. And in this collection, he talks about all the themes. He talks about, killer animals were a big theme, gothic romance, vampires, evil children, and includes a lot of amazing artwork, because that's one of the big things that sold these paperbacks was the cover. This is one of those things where that's many times how they only made their sales, by enticing people to pick up a book based on the crazy covers. So whether it's V.C. Andrews or William Peter Blatty's Legion, sequel to The Exorcist, Unholy Communion by Adam Savage, or this one, The Gilgul, which is beautiful and actually features a sculpted creature that was then photographed for the cover. It's really great. He goes into the history of the artists, history of the writers, and has some hilarious synopses of different books. But one of the benefits of this is that as part of the publishing of that, he was able to republish or have republished a lot of the books that he talks about that have been out of print for decades. And a lot of them have this little sort of insignia in the top corner showing that it is talked about in Paperbacks from Hell in special edition that it's been put out. So you can get these, and they're these small little, just like you would have seen them on the at the rack at the drugstore or at the supermarket, back in 1986 or 1978 or whenever they originally published. So pretty cool stuff. And,
I love the blurb. If you're close enough to kiss her, you're close enough to die.
Oh, the blurbs are hilarious. And hilariously enough, both the Hartford Courant and the Charlotte Observer apparently read everything, because their blurbs are almost on all of these terrible books. And most of them are terrible. Like, it is pure camp, a lot of them. But, I mean, people made their careers writing stuff like this. So
if you're a fan of Katharine Hepburn, you definitely know about the Hartford Courant.
That would carry.
Yeah. All right. Over to Caleb. Caleb, what is your Wolf of the Week?
So my Wolf of the Week goes out to a music artist, but also to a concert I got to go to. Bill's not the only one who goes and sees live music. I believe it was for actually my birthday back in October, my husband got me tickets to go see Tyler Childers. So Tyler Childers, if you're not familiar with who he is, if you listen to his records, old school country western, right? A little bit of has a very twangy voice, not like radio country, right? Going back to like Hank Williams Sr. type of voice. And I absolutely adore him. You also may remember last year there was a little bit of controversy about this because he is up and coming and he's making a name for himself. But his main hit off of his first single off of his most recent album is called In Your Love. Well, the music video was all about gay minors. It was all about these two gay men who were minors who fell in love, tried to live together. Not exactly Brokeback Mountain. Nobody got murdered, but like bad things happen, and it's just the memory of that. The video is very touching. Like the video will make you bawl. It made me cry. I still watch it. I get teared up. It's very good. Tyler Childers is not a gay man. Tyler Childers is making a name for himself and is becoming a well-known name in country music in today's time, and is an ally. And that matters. You have people like Jason Isbell who's also very outspoken, about queer rights and stuff like that. And they're these kind of emergence on the mainstream of what have previously been these underground artists. I mean, Tyler Childers played a place called Whitewater Tavern here. That's just a dive bar, 7 or 8 years ago. And then he just sold out our biggest arena in Arkansas. And I was actually surprised when I got there. I was like, okay, maybe they'll just have the lower floor open, not super known, also gay drama. But no, 2 stories, sold out Arkansas's biggest arena. I thought it was a phenomenal show. I've been to a lot of shows, right? You go to that's if you're watching this is my husband and I taking a little selfie together. You go to a lot of shows and you hear a lot of artists who they sound phenomenal. They sound great. We had nosebleeds, but they do not necessarily sound what the album sounds like. Tyler Childers sounds exactly what he sounds like in person as he does on all the wax tracks I have. His voice sounds exactly the same, and he has such complete and utter control of it that it's ridiculous. He is a phenomenal singer and also a good musician. What I was not expecting, though, is for his band, who again, they have this traditional like country western sound, old school. They straight up pulled a Tyler Sturgis, or not Tyler Sturgis, whatever. Sturgill Simpson. Sorry, they pulled a Sturgill Simpson. That band went full blown psychedelia, right? They played his music and it sounded like what you expected, but then they had these breaks where they went just meta modern psychedelia, lots of steel guitar mixed with a DJ, mixed with somebody who did all kinds of weird sound effects. It was awesome, right? Like they had like their guitarist was wearing a Grateful Dead shirt, so it's mixing this like weird psychedelia like music with meta modern country, and it was just fun. Like I wish I had recorded those moments because it was amazing, and they're not on his album. So doing something weird, different, and pushing the boundaries of that genre, and I'm fucking loving it. Like it was a fantastic and good time, and got to spend it with my honey, so I'm happy.
Yeah. Steve, can you go back to the graphic you had for the tour there? Yeah. Caleb, the Hold Steady and Deer Tick, these are not country artists.
Yeah, no, they're not.
Definitely not country artists.
And so they were not there. He actually had somebody else. He had Corey Brannon open for him here. Uh-huh. So those artists were not there. I have listened to Deer Tick, right? And so I know who they are. That and you're right, they're not country artists. But that just shows like he's doing something weird and different. And really, I think credit to Sturgill Simpson for opening up that world, showing that hey, we can go in there and still have do all kinds of just strange things with this music. And it's great, man. Take a little something and just sink into it.
Yeah, and just in terms of country artists who are allies, I think you also have to mention Maren Morris.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has been more vocal than she has. On
and two, not just allies, but we do have some pretty amazing queer. I mean, lots of amazing queer country artists, but we have a lot of amazing queer country artists that are on the mainstream. I mean, Brandy Carlisle. You've got he's playing MC in Cabaret right now. My brain just shut off.
I was ready to say Orville Peck.
Orville Peck, yeah. Kind of has a Roy Orbison sound.
And one of the brothers Osborne is, right?
One of.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So
all right. So my woof of the week is also music oriented, and this might be a much more familiar name to you people. So my woof of the week goes out to the film Becoming Led Zeppelin. And this came out last year in some very select viewings, but the wide release happened this year, and it covers the first 2 years of Led Zeppelin. The drummer John Bonham died in 1980 from the complications with his alcoholism, and he didn't do too many interviews, but they found one that was 47 minutes long. And some of the most touching moments are when the other three members of Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and John Paul Jones, are listening, and probably for the first time, to things that John Bonham had to say. So it covers their first 2 years. It's a wonderfully constructed movie, going through their influences, going through the business and societal machinations that brought them, the four of them together. And you don't hear a note of Led Zeppelin music for the first 40 minutes. But when you do, it is transcendent. And as I said, Becoming Led Zeppelin is very much an accurate title. It covers only the first 2 years of the band, 1968 to 1970, basically from their formation to them becoming, for a time, the biggest band in the world. And it was really well constructed. It's a minute over 2 hours. There's also a cut that's 1 hour. It's 137 minutes. There is also a cut apparently that is nearly 4 hours. So when this comes to home video, that's the version I want to see, because I'm dying to see what they cut out, because there's still more of the story, but it was still really well constructed. And I am a little bit upset that I didn't see this in IMAX.
I saw this actually earlier. I was looking at some rock bios and stuff, and you can buy it on Prime, I think, or you can rent it on there. I want to see it. It's on my list. I was starting to watch The Fall of Western Civilization earlier, and that's where I saw it. But I want to see this. I love Led Zeppelin. Love that band. Bill,
I just love when it's a familiar story.
Yeah.
And there's still new things you get out of it.
What do you have a favorite Zepp song?
Of the major songs, Immigrant Song.
Yeah.
Of the deeper cuts, I really like. Some of it is the story behind it, but All My Love from Into the Door. A song that gets blasted that I absolutely love is "Fool in the Rain" from In Through the Outdoor. And I don't know, Going to California I always really liked, for the more acoustic based stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I had to pick a song that's Immigrant Song. I don't think that's ever been.
Yeah, I like Whole Lot of Love. I like Do You Maker, or Want to Make, whatever that's called. Did You Maker? Do
You Maker?
Yeah. That's fun. I look, at the end of the day, is it cliche? Yes. I will just sink into Stairway to Heaven. I love that. Like, it just hits you like a ton of bricks. And it's a fun song. But yeah, so for me, it's a Whole Lot of Love, and an Immigrant Song too. I mean, I
also really love Heartbreaker.
Yeah,
and I really love, even though like sometimes the versions of it aren't so hot, Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Immigrant Song, absolutely. Yeah.
Dazed and Confused.
Immigrant Song sounds like it could have been recorded today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stairway, absolutely. Yeah. Cashmere, yeah, I think I'm with you, Bill. It's like sometimes it's good, sometimes.
So for a certain segment of our listenership, what I'm going to say is they're just going to be like, or duh, or whatever. But if you haven't ever read it, it's not completely accurate. But read Hammer of the Gods. It's a fun kind of like as far as like a first read. It gets into it eats its own shit a little bit, so it's in on its own joke.
But it's a lot of those rock biographies then did that. I mean,
but it is a fun read.
It really is. It is definitely influenced by No One Here's Alive. They basically like cover the same terrain as much as they can. But there was something fun about those books, I read it for the first time when I was 15, and that was my first kind of just really understanding the history of everything, and the Snapper story, like just reading the ridiculousness of all this. Some of it's has been proven to turn out to be bullshit, and some of it is let's say they put a button on it, okay, but it is an enjoyable read. Let's put it that way, and you can find a copy for like
easy. Yeah, it's everywhere.
There's so many of them out there. Yeah.
Could you find a copy at McKay's in Winston-Salem?
I am certain you can find a copy at McKay's. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we got to wrap this one up now. And again, we are the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on most social media as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on Facebook, however, as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to listen to us, you can do so by downloading us through Apple Music. You can access us through Spotify and many of the other podcatching platforms. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. If you joined us tonight through Facebook Live, thank you. If you were watching us on YouTube, thank you. If you're watching us later on YouTube, thank you. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
I'm not having a good hair day right now. And what the hell? We'll be back in about 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
Bye.